on YouTube, channel RJAM News. To all Teleradio Bandido viewers and listeners, you can now watch Teleradio Bandido on our new YouTube channel, RJAM News. Hit the subscribe button and like the video. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you get notified when a new video gets uploaded. Don't miss out on our dynamite lineup.
A straight question deserves a straight answer. Presenting straight from Radyo Bandido, an ongoing question and answer series with candidates for the May 2022 elections. This week's candidate, Bongbong Marcos, answers the question straight. Will Bongbong Marcos promise not to declare martial law during his term if he's elected president? Will he reach out to the opposition and unite the country if he's elected? How will he bring the food prices down? Does he want the PCGG abolished? Will he industrialize the country to create more jobs? Find out the answer straight from Radyo Bandido. The launch date is March 8, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Be sure to tune in to RJFM 100.3, DZRJ 810 AM, RJ Digi TV, Sky Cable Channel 19, and all DTT Black Boxes, your Bandido TV Channel 224 on Sky Cable.
Mga kababayan,
magsama-sama na tayo. Joy Belmonte, handang tumulong. Tulong-tulong, tuluyan tulong. Joy Belmonte, ng Quezon City. Tuloy ang serbisyo. Tuloy ang progreso. Si Joy Belmonte, ng Quezon City. Joy Belmonte, handang tumulong. Tulong-tulong, tuluyan tulong. Joy Belmonte, ng Quezon City.
Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam right here on DZRJ and RJ TV. My name is Eric Lecain. I'm here to talk about stories going on around the world, some of the most interesting stuff that happened this week. Now, the beautiful Lolly Tolentino is out this week, but she will be back next week. But instead, we have a very special guest. Michael Volchek will be here. He's the guy you want to talk to if you want to know anything about Russia. So he'll be on talking about what's going on there in Russia and the Ukraine. But before he comes out, finally, after 2 long years of sitting home and watching Netflix and eating banana bread that I learned to make by watching YouTube, the COVID virus looks to be heading out of town as the Philippines and much of the world drops to level 1. This long ordeal of COVID and constant surprises it gave us every week. Hey, 1,000 people could die, then 100,000 people, then 1 million, and then millions. Every week there was a new number. We just couldn't even believe. How could we be having a pandemic with all the technology and medicines that we have? And then there was the ever-changing names, the China virus, the Brazilian variant, the South African variant, the British variant, the Beta, the Delta, the Omicron, which I still do not pronounce correctly. And of course, there was the regular, the one that many of us got, including me. All were more deadly, more contagious, far worse than the one before. Then there was all the politics of it. There was the scientists who were saying, hey guys, this is pretty bad. And the politicians who all of a sudden were way smarter than any of the doctors. Then there was the wear a mask people, then the don't wear a mask, they don't work people, who also said take this weird drug or take that weird drug that was made for deworming animals. And then of course there was the race to the vaccine. Who was going to get it first, and would they share it? There were so many lies about the vaccine, so many truths. Would it kill you? Would it turn you into a zombie? So many debates, so much news. Honestly, it was surprising that we didn't kill each other. It's surprising that we didn't go to war. So now that it seems to be at an end, and it's not the hot topic of every news cycle, we can finally be at peace. If not for the threat that came last week of Russia using massive nuclear arsenals to blow us all up. Yes, at the end of the worst pandemic in modern history, we are greeted with Vladimir Putin telling us that maybe if the pandemic didn't kill you, I will. This week, he told his nuclear guy to be on high alert, that their boring job of sitting in a chair and staring at a big red button may start to get interesting. Maybe they will have to lift a finger soon. But before we go blowing up the world, let's just scare everyone that we might do it, that we're thinking about it, especially if you try to stop us from taking over the Ukraine. But right after that news came out, the Russians were going to be possibly using their nuclear warheads as a threat. A nervous-looking foreign minister came out and said, we don't use our missiles as a threat. We either use them or we don't. Whatever that means. Right now, Russia is marching through the Ukraine, bombing everything. Military installations, communications, government buildings, and civilians. So far, 2,000 civilians have been killed. Maybe. There's no way to really know that for sure. Some reports have them at killing 2,000 Russian troops. But there's no way to really know, because there's even another report that says that 4,000 troops have been killed, including one of their top generals. But there's one thing for sure, that this war is not as easy as Putin had hoped. But it was supposed to be easy. Putin thought his huge military and massive firepower would give him the ability to just waltz in and kill that comedian president and blow up a bunch of stuff and just take over. Then install one of his cronies as president, blame everything on the West. Easy peasy Russian squeezy. Done. But that's not exactly what has happened, has it? Ukrainians are doing something that we didn't expect. They are fighting back. And that comedian president, who was so amazing on the Ukraine version of Dancing with the Stars, well, turns out that he's a real-life Avenger, like that guy who shoots the arrows. In fact, he looks like that guy who shot the arrows, Hawkeye. But you wouldn't know it, because before he was president, he put out a video of himself pretending to play the piano with his ding-dong. Can I say ding-dong? Just recently the U.S. offered him a plane ticket to get the heck out of there, since it's been reported that there's a Putin death squad that's been sent there to kill him. But he turned it down. He said to the U.S., I don't need a plane ticket. I need ammunition. The Russians actually had claimed that he had fled the country. So he posted photos of himself right there in the thick of things, wearing battle gear and holding a machine gun. Remember the American President Donald Trump, who hid in a bunker when a bunch of protesters showed up with signs in Washington? This guy is the opposite of that. They even showed him getting a vaccine with his shirt off. And he does not have the body of a usual president. I mean, this dude has been chopping wood. And he's inspired so many, because the people of the Ukraine are fighting back. They're even giving out guns to civilians. In an interview with a man, he was holding a rifle. They asked him if he knew how to use it, and he said, no, but I'll figure it out. When the Russian warships showed up at Snake Island, which is part of Ukraine, a small group of Ukrainian soldiers were there defending it. The ships on the loudspeaker blared, "This is a Russian warship. I suggest you surrender your weapons and capitulate. Otherwise, I will open fire. Do you copy?" Ukrainians could be heard, "You think I should tell him to go F himself?" A few seconds of silence, and over the loudspeaker, the Ukrainian soldier said, "Russian warship, go F yourself." Now, there were reports that those soldiers actually survived, but however, the president came out and said, sadly, none of them had survived, but they will be treated as war heroes. But these acts of defiance are coming from all over, even from the civilians. The Russian military has been having difficulty with gas and food as they're driving across the Ukraine in this 40-mile-long caravan. There's a recording of a man asking a Russian soldier, "What's wrong?" And the soldier replied, "We ran out of gas." And the man replied, "Hey, listen, I would be happy to drive you back to Russia." The Ukrainian government has put out ads on how to make Molotov cocktails. Even the former prime minister has a step-by-step instructional video you can watch on how to put gas in a bottle and stuff a rag in it and set it on fire and throw it at Russians. There's a video of a grandmother cursing one of the Russian soldiers, then gave him some sunflower seeds as a gift and said she will enjoy seeing these sunflower seeds spring up from your dead body that's buried in the ground. There's a great video of a guy carrying a landmine across the road so that Ukrainian trucks could pass, smoking a cigarette at the same time. And then there's a road company that's changing the road signs to point in the wrong direction. Some of them say, Russians, go F yourself, go F yourself again, and then Russians, go F yourself back to Russia. I guess you can guess what the F stands for. There's a video of a man standing in front of a Russian tank with his hands up, daring him to run him over. I think he got that from the Chinese History Channel. But suffice to say that the Ukrainians are not going away quietly. Now, even though 1 million people have fled the country, most are staying behind and fighting. This is something that Putin didn't expect. And even though he is running a massive propaganda campaign claiming to be liberating the country and that he is their hero, but the president of the Ukraine is the one that's coming out as being the hero. And Putin is looking more and more like your average James Bond villain. Now, I would like to point out that Ukraine is not a poor country, and people fleeing are not like Africans fleeing from Somalia or Rohingyans fleeing from Myanmar. These are mostly regular middle-class people with nice homes and jobs, but Putin is bombing everything. He's bombing their houses and apartment buildings, which is now going to be an issue because where are those people going to go? Unlike the refugees we see in poor countries, which always seem to be stuck at the border with nothing to eat, the Ukrainians, they have money. They can stay in hotels. So they've been welcomed by many countries, including Japan and Poland and the U.S. and the Philippines. Yes, the Philippines is now open to foreigners, including Ukrainians. Countries are coming to the aid of the Ukrainians, saying that we see what you're going through and we are behind you and you can come and stay in our hotels. This is something else that I don't think Putin realized would happen. I thought he'd think much of the world would not pay any attention to this. Kind of like when he walked into Crimea. I mean, that was not a big deal. Most people never even heard of Crimea. He got a few sanctions, it was not that big a deal, and he got to keep the place. Most people can't even find Ukraine on the map. Now, the world is saying, well, we let you slide before, but not this time. And they are slamming the Russians. Not so much with military force, as many of us had hoped they would, but with the big S, sanctions. Now, I think Putin thought that he had this covered as well. He knew if he invaded the Ukraine that the U.S. would put sanctions on his country, that the U.S. would put some kind of banking sanctions like they always do. That's why the Russians have been building up a giant war chest. They've been hoarding foreign currency and gold so they could prop up their own currency. If it started to drop, well, it has started to drop. All right, in fact, the ruble took a swan dive off a cliff this week, and this is going to hurt. It's like if you go to buy an iPhone in the Philippines for 35,000 pesos, and then in a single day it goes to 350,000 pesos because the money that you have in your pocket is worthless. By the way, they can forget buying an iPhone in Russia anymore because Apple is pulling out of Russia. In fact, many companies are pulling out of Russia because everyone is looking at everyone to do their part. Oh, you're still selling to Russia? Well, we will boycott your product, so you better get out. I mean, companies are pulling out of Russia like Exxon and Shell and Boeing, all the major car companies, IKEA, H&M. So now Russia will have to make their own overpriced, ripped up jeans. TikTok is pulling out. So you can't see Russians dancing to American music sung by Asians. But one of the big ones, the most interesting ones, is Google. It has stopped Russian state media from using its platforms. I mean, Russia is the master of disinformation, and to get their story out, it's doing a big favor to the Ukrainians. It's going to make it much harder for the Russians to be able to do this. Right now, people are lining up for sometimes days to try and get their money out of the bank in Russia. Even the super rich oligarchs are moving their yachts to places that they can hide them and scrambling to pull their money out of foreign banks because Putin now has put them in such a bad position. Because not only is the world mad at him, but his own people are starting to go against him. There are protests in the streets in Russia, something that is very much against the law. But people don't seem to care at this point. You know, this is what topples regimes, the people. When the people turn on you, and eventually Ukraine is defeated or not, but who is ever going to deal with Putin again? His team is being removed from the World Cup. The volleyball team can no longer play in international matches. People are throwing out Russian-made goods. Restaurants are pouring out Russia vodka in the street. I mean, after this is all over, who's ever going to win a deal with Putin ever again? Some people are even alluding back to the days of the Soviet Union and how it fell. And maybe that it's going to become crashing down yet again in front of our eyes. This is Eric Lecain on the World News Jam. We got Michael Volchek coming up. The next segment, he's going to explain all of this. So please stick around and we'll be right back. Hello, Philippines, and welcome back to the show. My name is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV, and I am joined with Michael Volchek. If you want to know anything about Russia, you want to talk to Michael because he knows everything Russian. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Eric.
So, Mike, you were a Russian studies major, right?
Yes, I studied military affairs in the Cold War.
Okay. Now, you also were part of a YouTube video that's out now. What was the title of that? I can't remember.
The title of the video was "Why Ukraine is the West's Fault," and it was given in 2015 at the University of Chicago, and I introduced the professor who gave the talk, Professor John J. Mearsheimer.
Oh, okay. That has like 20 million views now, something like that.
I haven't checked today, but it's been getting a lot of views lately.
Yeah, I would think lately. I think it would as of lately, because getting right to it, I guess the first question I would like to ask is, why is Putin doing this? Now, I know why he says he's doing it. He says that Ukraine is an illegitimate country, and historically it belongs to Russia, and it was okay for it to stay independent before, as long as there was a pro-Putin president in place, or maybe, an American president who loved him unconditionally. But according to him, the West is like an infection, and they have taken over the Ukraine, and he needs to rid that country of the Nazis, and the Russians are there to, save the Ukrainians or save the Russians, as he calls them. So, the Ukrainians are being run by a regime now, and the only reason that they are there is because of the mistakes of the previous Russian leaders. And the corrupt West was able to overthrow the Ukraine, and we must stop them, or they will try and overthrow us. That was the speech that Putin just gave.
Yeah, well, back in 2008, Putin came out and when NATO announced their open door policy that anybody could join NATO who wanted to, Putin came out and said, "Listen, you cannot allow Ukraine or Belarus or any of our neighbors to join NATO. That would be a existential threat to us, and or to join the European Union." And the West basically just ignored that. And Putin has been very serious about that the whole time. He does not want NATO on his doorstep. He already has the Baltic states, which joined before Putin was in power. And Norway has a very tiny border with Russia as well. But he doesn't want NATO setting up troops and observation posts and listening posts, and also just creating a sort of attraction for Western-style democracy and open commerce when he's got a really great operation running in Russia right now that is based on neither of those things.
I mean, do you think a lot of it has to do with how Ukraine is strategically located? That
Yes.
He's worried that, like for instance, if you look at Ukraine on the map, there's a river that runs around, and near, and that's where Putin gets a lot of his oil and gas and stuff. And if NATO was able to get that close, and like, let's say NATO wanted to attack him, as he thinks that they want to. He thinks they're aggressors and they're going to attack him. You know, the first thing they'd be able to do is get near or very close to where his oil is coming out of the ground. And I mean, do you think that worries him, or that's the reason? You know, because Belarus is here, but Ukraine sticks out. It like sticks out into Russia.
I mean, for sure, this entire thing is about geography, right? Putin's not invading Iceland. He's invading his nearest neighbor that he does not want right on top of them. No great power or regional hegemon or global hegemon wants an opposing military force right on their doorstep. Right, when the Russians started building military base in Cuba in 1962, I think the United States went crazy. It was absolutely unacceptable to us. If Mexico were to join a military pact tomorrow with China, and the Chinese started loading up transport ships with armored divisions and listening devices coming over to be set up in Mexico, you know, we would invade the next day before the chips could get here. Yeah. This is certainly what it is from Putin's point of view, which is not to say that I'm trying to justify Russia's right to invade their sovereign neighbors. I'm not, but this is definitely where Putin is coming from.
I mean, I heard that, you know, Putin, he has that oil pipeline that runs through Ukraine. And that Ukraine, this is something that I didn't even know, Ukraine charges them like a fortune to run their gas through that pipeline, like billions and billions of dollars in tariffs. And if he could just get the Ukraine, if he could just take over Ukraine, that would alleviate a lot of those tariffs. If he could get somebody in there, like, Yanukovych, you know, somebody who is a pro-Putin guy, then maybe that would ease up some of that stuff. Because right now, they built all these other pipelines, but now those other pipelines are giving him trouble right now, because I think the one that's going directly to Germany, they've stopped construction on.
Germany did announce they were stopping the construction of Nord Stream 2. But I don't think Putin is launching the largest land war in Europe since 1945 in order to save some money on a pipeline. He does not want NATO nearby. He does not want the EU. He doesn't want the attraction of Western-style democracy right on his doorstep, because he likes his system the way it is, and he would like to keep it as safe and controlled as he possibly can. And having Ukraine like turn into Germany, which is, you know, the Ukraine's vision and Putin's nightmare, is just the kind of thing that he does not want.
Do you think this might have anything to do also with Crimea? This is something I've been thinking about for a while, because, you know, when the president of Ukraine was ousted, and then Putin came in and took Crimea, you know, not really much happened. He was able to take it and keep it. Now this anti-Putin guy is in there, and he still has Crimea, but I had not known until I started studying that in that area right there where Crimea is, they have found trillions of cubic meters of gas. And now that Putin has control of that Crimea, he has control of that whole area. And the Ukrainians cut his water off. Like they cut the fresh water that was going into Crimea. So Crimea like has no fresh water now. So it's costing him all this money to keep that going. And the people, you know, you know, Shell and Exxon had come in and helped the Ukrainians to build all these extra, you know, these things to get this gas out of the ground. And then once Putin came in and took over Crimea, now he's kicked out all these, you know, Exxon and Shell, they all left. And now the Russians have like absorbed all that stuff that they have done there. And I think he doesn't want to give that up, because he keeps saying that Crimea is not on the table. Because I heard that they, you know, during the negotiations, they keep bringing that up. And he's like, that's not on the table. We're never giving that back.
Well, Crimea is somewhat different. Putin has a habit of starting wars right before he has an election coming up, or in some cases generating a crisis that sort of a false flag crisis in the case of the bombing of the apartment buildings in Moscow. But Crimea was well timed around his last election. It was a really easy win for him militarily, and I'm not aware of the details of the talks between the Ukrainians and the Russians about a ceasefire or peace talks. But I am sure Putin has no interest in giving back Crimea. Even if he were to pack up his bags and leave Ukraine tomorrow, he would not leave Crimea.
Yeah, I mean, that's, they're right there on the water. There's negotiations going on in Belarus between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and so far as what the news says, they are going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, the only thing that came out of it was these civilian corridors, which, according to the Ukrainians, the Russians violated almost immediately. So, peace talks after 7 days after an invasion usually don't go anywhere because things probably haven't changed too much on both sides' intent. I mean, Ukraine has no intent of surrendering, and Russia probably hasn't changed his mind in the last 7 days. Peace talks usually go on after each side has a lot of war exhaustion and fatigue, which it's too early for. So I don't see those peace talks going anywhere.
Do you think that either Putin, either he's crazy or he just made a huge miscalculation that this was not going to be as easy as he thought it was? Do you think that he was planning to just waltz in and take over, and this was going to be very simple, and then it just didn't go that way, and now he's trying to figure out how he's going to strategically turn this around? Because right now, A, the world is against him, and B, on the ground in Ukraine, he's taken over cities, but it's not as easy as I think that he had hoped that it was going to be.
Yeah, so, no plan survives contact with the enemy. And it is pretty clear from some of the operations that the Russians carried out that they expected this war to go very quickly and to be over in possibly a week. They landed light infantry at the airport north of Kiev, indicating that they thought they would only have to hold it for a short period of time before the main force came and reinforced them. Otherwise, those operations go very badly. We did the same thing in Normandy. We launched paratroopers into Normandy on the night of June 5th, June 6th. And the plan was for the army to come in and reinforce them quickly, and we did do that. In the case of the capturing of the airport north of Kyiv, those troops got overrun and captured by the Ukrainians. So they were expecting a very different war than they've gotten. And I think most military analysts thought that Ukraine would collapse within a week, and they really haven't. Which is not to say that I'm optimistic about the Ukrainians' chances of winning, but they are definitely extracting a much higher cost on the Russians than I'm sure Putin thought. And in terms of your original question, which was, is Putin crazy, or did he just not expect it to go this way? I don't think he's crazy. I think that he's very much caught by surprise by the resistance of the Ukrainians. I don't know whether he fell victim to his own propaganda or his own talking points about the Ukrainians not really being an independent people, and that they would just welcome the Russians when they walked in. Those words are actually very similar to Americans who heard Donald Rumsfeld said that we'd be welcomed as liberators in Iraq, and that didn't actually go that way either.
Yeah, I think I think that maybe Putin had thought that once he got in there that people would throw down rose petals that he could walk on, and now grandmothers are coming out and standing up against the soldiers, and they're giving out machine guns to people like you and me and saying, if you see a Russian, kill him. Which if I was Putin, I guess I wouldn't think that civilians would turn on his military. And that's part of the reason why I think, they've estimated now that 2,000 civilians have been killed. There's no way to confirm that, but I think that if this is what's going to happen, if the civilians are going to fight the military, first thing, a lot of civilians are going to die. But secondly, I mean, that puts the military in such a weird position, because now the military is not just fighting the Ukrainian the Ukrainian soldiers. They're fighting the people, the ones that they're there to supposedly help. So how is that strategically in the minds of the Russian soldiers? How they have to fight people like regular people now?
Yeah, if you look back at Iraq, you can sort of get a little bit of a glimpse into what's in store for Russia.
The street fighting.
Sorry?
I think in Iraq, what Iraq wanted is, okay, the military comes in, defeats the military, but it's that hand-to-hand combat in the streets, the guerrilla warfare, where they were thinking that they would have the upper hand against the U.S. soldiers.
Well, what I was going to say about Iraq was that, relatively speaking, we relatively easily were able to defeat the Iraqi army and conquer Iraq. But the occupation of Iraq is what we ultimately lost. So holding down an insurgency against a guerrilla warfare by a population that views your occupation as illegitimate, that is a much, much harder thing. And, our relative military force between the Iraqis and us was, there was a massive imbalance. We were massively more powerful, and yet we still had a very hard time controlling that population. And the Ukrainian population is both larger and equally views the invaders as unjustified. And I did not expect this Ukrainian resistance to be as strong as it was, and I applaud them for that. But I think the insurgency will be even worse for the Russians. I just don't think there's going to come a point where the Ukrainians say, well, there's no such thing as Ukraine. We're just part of Russia now. I just don't see them giving up their identity, their separate language, their separate culture, and just accede to Putin's vision of one big Russian reunification.
A straight question deserves a straight answer. Presenting straight from Radio Bandido, an ongoing question and answer series with candidates for the May 2022 elections. This week's candidate, Bongbong Marcos, answers the question straight. Will Bongbong Marcos promise not to declare martial law during his term if he's elected president? Will he reach out to the opposition and unite the country if he's elected? How will he bring the food prices down? Does he want the PCGG abolished? Will he industrialize the country to create more jobs? Find out the answer straight from Radio Bandido. The launch date is March 8, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Be sure to tune in to RJFM 100.3, DZRJ 810 AM, RJ Digi TV, Sky Cable Channel 19, and all DTT black boxes, and Radio Bandido TV Channel 224 on Sky Cable.
Do you think the Ukrainians can win this?
Do you mean the conventional war that's happening right now?
Well, I mean, by the way things are looking, they're not going to win that.
No, I don't think they're going to win.
But, I mean, Russia went into Afghanistan, and look how long they were there trying to deal with that situation.
Again, they won the invasion of Afghanistan. It was not a problem, the same way we did. But again, in cases of both the United States and the Soviet Union, later, I guess what would now be Russia, the occupation, we both lost. So ultimately, if your question is, will Russia ultimately withdraw and Ukraine return to being a sovereign state? Yes, I think it will, but that could take 10 to 20 years.
Yeah. Why do you think the United States didn't come in and help them? Everybody's asked. I've probably been asked that question more than any other question. Why did the United States not help them? Why did Europe turn their back on the Ukraine president when he was begging them to come help them?
I mean, because we can't. Neither the Western European countries that are part of NATO or the United States is willing to risk a global nuclear war over Ukraine. We all don't welcome Ukraine, a sovereign country, being invaded by a regional superpower. But we're not willing to exchange defending Kiev for Russian SS-20 ICBMs landing on Chicago. We're just not willing to make that trade. It's as simple as that.
Do you think that if the EU or NATO or even the United States decided to go ahead and offer assistance to the Ukrainians? Now, there's talk that the CIA is actually running covert operations in Ukraine.
I'm sure they are.
Things that, where they go in and they say, if you're caught, we will not, it's like a Mission Impossible type thing. We can't acknowledge your existence, that kind of thing. But if they decided to assist the Ukrainians, do you think that Putin would fire off a nuclear missile? Because last week, everybody kept saying, oh, they're just threatening, they're threatening. And what's his name? Lavrov came out and said, hey, we don't threaten. We have a criteria. If we decide we're going to do it, we're going to do it. We're not threatening. We're just going to shoot if that's what our criteria says. So if they decide to come in and help, which I think there's some pressure for them to help the Ukrainians, do you think that Putin would use his nuclear armaments?
Well, let me say, I just think it's inconceivable that NATO is going to get involved directly in a kinetic conflict with Russia over Ukraine. The Ukrainians asked for a no-fly zone, which essentially means you're putting Western combat planes over Ukraine to shoot down Russian combat planes. We're not going to do that. So I don't have to think about what's going to happen after that, because we're not going to do that. And the reason we're not going to do that is it's too uncertain. We just don't know at what point Russia would decide that they had to escalate, start escalating up the nuclear ladder. But I'm pretty sure that Germany doesn't want to trade Berlin for defending Kiev either. There's just no. It's too. The costs and risks are too high. So the benefit of getting involved is we would protect a country that was being invaded by another country, and the risks are your population gets decimated. You just put that on a scale, and there's no way you come out with let's get involved.
Why do you think the EU decided to not announce a no-fly zone over the Ukraine?
For the reasons I just said.
Okay.
There's no way. Because you would have to. No-fly zone means.
Yeah, if you fly over, they were going to shoot you.
It means that you're flying combat operations over an area to prevent anyone else from flying. And in order to do that, you have to shoot at them.
Yeah.
That would be NATO planes shooting at Russian planes. We're not going to do that for the reasons I just stated.
So this is one of those times where we see, I think, the reasons why the Russians and the Americans don't want to give up their nuclear weapons.
I mean, nobody likes to give up their nuclear weapons. You know who regrets giving up their nuclear weapons more than anybody else? Ukraine. Because they used to have them and they unilaterally gave them up in 1991 when they became an independent state. And if they still had them, there would have been no invasion. Nuclear weapons are the greatest protective shield you can have. And I'm sure the Ukrainians regret deeply, deeply giving those up now.
What do you think will happen if they kill Zelensky? Because I know they're trying to. I know that's part of what they want to do, is they think that if they can kill the president, that the military will lay down their arms and the people will go, okay, we'll just call us Russians.
Well, I mean, again, in strategic planning, one of the options you have is to decapitate the command structure, which is, to kill either the political or the military leadership, so that the troops on the ground don't know what to do anymore. Killing Zelensky would definitely be a blow to the Ukrainians, but at this point, I just don't see Ukrainians suddenly surrendering if Zelensky was dead. They feel completely, and they are completely in the right in defending their territory against a completely unprovoked invasion. And dead or alive, I think every last one of them is going to fight as much as they can until the Russians go home.
I mean, do you think it would be a mistake that if Putin went after Zelensky and killed him, that would just make it worse? That would make it worse for him.
No, if I was Putin, I would kill Zelensky too, as fast as I could.
Okay.
Because he's been a tremendous rallying force for the Ukrainians. I wasn't trying to suggest that killing Zelensky would have no effect. It would definitely harm the Ukrainian resolve to fight. But they would continue to fight.
And now, like, the next step that you think that the Russians are going to do. So they have now moved in. They got the 40-mile caravan. They're on their way to Kiev. They're having some problems. They're having some issues with food and gas and some other problems. So right now, as it stands, in the situation they are now, what do you think is the next move? Because it seems like they've kind of hit a plateau. They've taken over the places that they can take over. Now it's on to the next step. But the next step is not what we thought. We thought they were going to go roll into Kiev, but they haven't. So what do you think he's going to, I mean, strategically, what do you think Russia will do next?
I mean, I expect them to, take as much of the non-cities as they can, as quickly as they can, and then they're going to surround the cities, and then they're going to pound them into surrender. Unfortunately. Yeah.
I mean, do you think Putin cares at all about the fact that his country now is a lot of people are protesting him and his country? I mean, the way that it seems that regimes are toppled is things like this, is when I can give example after example in Africa where regimes were toppled because a leader decided to do something that was good for him, that he wanted to take over something. This happened in kings back in England. They take over something, and then the people, his own people, are the ones that suffer because they don't have food and they don't have money, and you're spending so much money on the war, and then eventually the people revolt.
Well, let me tell you a story. My wife said to me a day or two after Russia invaded, "You told me they weren't going to invade." And that's true. I did not think that the Russians were going to invade Ukraine because I thought that they had such a great situation at that moment of extracting maximum concessions. They really had an opportunity to get a lot of what they wanted without firing a shot. And the flip side of that is to actually go into Ukraine and invade is incredibly bad and dangerous for Putin and the Russians. I mean, if there's a list of top 10 worst things that could happen, strategically for Russia, 5 or 6 of them are happening now because of this invasion. And they're completely tied down, right? So, from the Russian point of view, Finland joining NATO is the second worst thing that could happen after Ukraine joining NATO. And now Finland wants to join. I think they've even filed an application to join.
Yeah.
And so is Sweden. And right now, it's not like Finland. It's not like Russia can go and invade Finland and stop them from joining. They're too busy in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Plus, you have all of the strategic investments are being pulled out of Russia now. Exxon, BP, Shell, they've all announced they're leaving Russia, taking their money and their technology out. The West is more unified than they've been in 50 years against Russia. The list of things that are happening that are bad for Russia is long. I was very surprised that Putin invaded. But I think the worst thing for Putin personally is that, one day before he invaded Ukraine, there was 0% chance that he could be deposed or lose power. And that's not true anymore. The chances of him getting a bullet to the back of the head have gone up substantially, and they go up every single day that this war goes on, and that the occupation goes on after the war completes. The risks to Putin have just gone up exponentially, and if he were to lose the war, which I think is inconceivable, but if they were like to turn around and go back to Russian territory tomorrow, Putin would have a bullet in the back of his head by the end of that day. So he can't lose the war, and he never should have started the war. And so now his only choice is to win the war, which of course is terrible for Ukraine.
I mean, it's terrible for Ukraine, and it's also going to be terrible for Russia. Once they, win the war, the ruble's going to be worth same as currency, like currencies in Africa that when I was there they were worth 800 to the dollar, and now they're worth 8 million to the dollar. The
ruble's now worth less than a penny.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like to me like Putin is in a no-win scenario. If he wins the war, he loses. If he loses the war, he loses. And once this whole thing is over, who's going to want to get their picture taken with him? Is he going to be invited to any of these big G7, G20, whatever, all these things like he was before? Is he going to be able to stand there and negotiate with other, people? Is Macron ever going to go back to, Russia to negotiate with him? Yeah, sure. They have oil and they have gas, and they are the ones that supply it to Europe. But as soon as Europe figures that out, I just think that how is he going to lead his country now? He's, according to a lot of reports, he's hated in Russia right now by a lot of people. Now, and I'm sure a lot of people think he's great and wonderful, but people are protesting. Man, protesting in Russia is one of the most dangerous things you can do as far as your life goes. So I just wonder, what kind of leader can Putin be now, whether he wins or loses or anything?
I mean, I didn't get into the reputational aspects because my expertise is a little bit more focused on military affairs. But reputationally, I mean, Putin is completely destroyed. I mean, no one will want to have any kind of positive association with him in public anymore. Any kind of alliance or anything like that. It's just those doors are closed to him for the rest of his life. I mean, he's now being talked about in terms of Stalin and Hitler. There's no, he's scarred for life. Things like being readmitted to the G7, G8, none of that stuff can happen anymore. The Russian stock market is closed.
It's closed.
It's closed. If you had shares that traded on the Russian market and you needed money right now, you can't get that money because you can't trade the shares because the market's closed. The ruble's worth a penny, less than a penny. The damage to the economy over time to Russia is going to be considerable. And ultimately, since he's got a whole kleptocracy going, the oligarchs that make their money off of ruling Russia are not going to really like the situation. I mean, you have so many devastating things happening. From things like 21st century technologies like Google Pay and Apple Pay, they don't work in Russia anymore.
Yeah.
All of those large companies are pulling out of Russia. Russia's reverting to the 20th century technologies, technologically speaking.
You can't buy an iPhone now in Russia. Right.
Apple's not selling product in Russia anymore. There's so much, the economy is a secondary consideration to the military, but it's not no consideration. If you go on like that for a while, especially the oligarchs who make their money off of running Russia, they are not going to like this situation for very long.
Yeah, I mean, some people have compared it to the fall of the Soviet Union, and this will be the second fall of the Soviet Union. That when push comes to shove, when all these guys who made all these billions of dollars and now they're losing their money and they're standing there just watching it disappear, that now the United States is after their yachts. And they don't even know where to put their stuff. All their, fabulous apartments that they had in New York and Paris and everything, all that stuff is disappearing. And then their kids' stuff is disappearing. And they're, blocking all their accounts. you take out all your Russian rubles, but then, or even you take out all your foreign currency, but they won't let you spend it. What are you going to do with it? So, people are thinking that, for a while that it was, the oligarchs that were going to put a bullet in the back of his head because they're just tired of this. But then you think that maybe the officials who you watch on television in these long tables where Putin is on one side of the table and they're on the table that's like 40 feet away, and they are looking really nervous, and they're all thinking to themselves, you know what? One of us is going to have to do something.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I would like to think that's what happens, but on the other hand, Stalin died in his sleep. So we'll see what happens there. But like I said, I think that if the oligarchs decide that this war is really too expensive for them, then Putin's really going to have a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I just sometimes I think about I look at other countries and that were in a similar situation where their leader was obviously stealing the wealth of the country. I mean, Putin was a KGB agent his whole life, making less than $40,000 a year, and now he's worth $200 billion. And I think as this opens up, and the people of Russia that are pro-Putin start to waver, very similar to what happened in the Philippines back in the 80s. Once the military decides to give up on you, it's over. And what kind of hold is Putin going to have on the military if his military leaders start to turn against him?
Well, I mean, Putin's biggest blunder here by far was in no way preparing his people or the world, making any kind of case for why he was justified in going into Ukraine. So he just seems completely without any legitimate justification for going into Ukraine. And that affects everything. It's why the Ukrainians are fighting with such determination. It's why you see anecdotal stories about the Russians not fighting with any kind of determination. You hear stories about Russian troops not knowing why they're in Ukraine, thinking that it was an exercise or something else. And the moral case matters. It determines whether troops fight harder, longer, provide greater resistance, or just surrender. And Putin just did an abominable job on that front. At the last second, like the day before the invasion, he gave some pretty unhinged speech citing Nazis, which had never the case had never been made before about the Ukrainians being Nazis. I mean, he's referring to the Azov division that formed after Crimea and was stupidly incorporated into the Ukrainian military. But nobody believes that the Ukrainians are Nazis or that the Ukraine in any way, presented a military threat to Russia. And that case was only made 24 hours before the invasion, and nobody ever heard. I mean, none of the Russians in there are thinking, "Oh, we're here to go kill Nazis." So basically, there is no justification for this war, and that is hardening the resolve of the Ukrainians and softening the resolve of the Russians. And I think that will continue.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Russian and you're in the street and you have your military rifle and all your training and your fatigues and all your, night vision glasses, and you come across a 50-year-old woman with a machine gun that can barely hold it up, do you shoot her? And here it was a joke that comedian made. It's like, we'll just stand back and watch the white people shoot each other because they are from, they're related. They're basically, they're not that far apart from their ethnic backgrounds. And they're basically, it almost seems like they're brother versus brother. And they're talking about, these towns that are on the border. And they're friends and sometimes marry each other across the border, across the Russian border, and now they're having to be at odds?
Yeah, I mean, borders don't count until suddenly they do. As happened in our Civil War and has happened, many times in history. But yes, the Ukrainians and the Russians share a very similar languages, similar culture, history, experience, church, religion. And in order to explain why you want to attack your cousins or brothers, you need a good justification. And Putin just never made that case. And that is just going to be devastating to the morale and the resolve of the Russian troops. And it's had the opposite effect on the Ukrainians. It's really stiffened their resistance dramatically.
Do you think it's helping Putin at all? He's master of misinformation. I mean, even in the Philippines, we have tons of pro-Putin propaganda coming across our Facebooks all the time. The fact that in Russia...
Not anymore.
The fact
Russia
that...
cut off access to Facebook and Twitter yesterday.
That on, Russia television, they're showing the divide in the United States, the pro-Putin side of the United States versus the anti-Putin side, and that you have, this one president saying, we need to fight against Putin, and the other president saying we need to embrace him, he's a genius.
Well, I mean, certainly dictators love to look at their enemies and highlight their weaknesses and assume that democracies are weak because they have a differences of opinion. I'm sure Putin was heartened by Donald Trump's remarks praising him, and I think it's somewhat it's possible, if not likely, that Putin had previously planned this invasion in what he was hoping would be Donald Trump's second term, where he knew he would have no resistance from the United States. But of course, the election fortunately didn't work out that way. But again, this is similar to what happened in the 30s and even in 1940 in the United States with Father Coughlin and the movement to support the Nazis in the United States. Until we're in a war, we will have differences of opinion. That's how democracies work, even if those opinions are wildly misguided.
Do you think that Putin would have invaded the Ukraine if Donald Trump was president?
Oh, absolutely.
It just would have been easier. And the question is, what if Donald Trump becomes president in the next election? Because for sure, at this point, it looks to be like, even though the Republicans are denouncing the Russian invasion, they won't say, they're very careful about their wording and how they say it because they know that Donald Trump may be running for president again.
I'm not sure what you're asking me. Are you asking me what will happen in Ukraine if Trump becomes president again?
Yeah, if this thing continues and, when we do elections, we're not like in the Philippines where they're allowed to only start campaigning for the election 3 months before. In the United States, it's like sometimes a year, sometimes 2 years before. So I think that Donald Trump's going to start campaigning for his presidency coming up in, I think, 2024. And a part of that's going to be the horrible ability that Biden has done handling this particular war. He handled Afghanistan horribly, and now this whole thing has happened in Ukraine because of him, because of Biden. If Biden hadn't have been so weak, then this would not have ever happened.
I do not think this is a particularly good issue for Trump. His hands are as dirty as they could be about Putin without having an actual videotape. And the politics of this are not good for Trump in any way. Anytime Trump opens his mouth to praise Putin or talk about Ukraine, whether it's to try and blame Biden or the Democrats or anything else, his hands are just so dirty on this. This is a terror. is a terrible turn of events if you're hoping Donald Trump is going to run for president again. It's very bad for him. This is bad. This is like what happened to Joe Kennedy in 1940, right? He couldn't run for president anymore because he had been openly praising Adolf Hitler. And once that happened, his political career was finished.
Because
I don't see that helping Trump at all.
They asked Republicans, who they preferred, Joe Biden or Vladimir Putin. And, Putin won by a landslide, which I think is something I've never seen before in the United States.
Well, being in a cult is a hell of a thing.
Yes, I know. But, I mean, so I think, in closing here, I think the big question is, how is Putin, what is his off ramp? How's he going to get out of this? In the end, we got about a minute and a half here. In final words, how do you think he's going to get out of, he's going to find a way out of this situation that he's got himself into?
I think if Putin's lucky, and I don't think he's going to be, his best case scenario here is to flatten Ukraine, conquer it, set up a puppet government, probably with the previous president who was deposed.
Yeah.
And use the Ukrainians to, occupy themselves. And maybe try and negotiate a neutrality treaty with the West. But that's his best case scenario these days. It involves a tremendous amount of suffering for the Ukrainians, but I don't think it's a very likely outcome. Militarily, I think he'll win, but in terms of winning the peace, I don't really see there's really much chance of him winning the peace. I think this is a pretty tremendous strategic blunder, the likes of which haven't happened since at least 2003. When we invaded Iraq.
Well, all we hope is that we don't end up like a movie and shooting our nuclear weapons at each other, and then the machines take over and come in and kill everybody that's left. But anyway, so Michael Volchak, thank you so much for being on the show here. We have learned a lot about what's going on there in Russia and Ukraine, because that right now is overshadowing our COVID. As the latest, greatest story, the latest, greatest, worst thing to happen in the world. So thank you so much for being here on the show. My name is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJ TV here in the Philippines. We will be back again next week. So everybody, please join us then. Be careful out there. We'll see you next week.